Hi, my name is Alex, and I am the creator of Rift 17, a single-player mod for Half-Life 2 Episode 2, which I am creating as part of my level design portfolio. In this video, I will analyze one of the levels from the extended demo of the mod that came out recently. For this analysis, I've chosen third map from the mod. It's my latest work, and because of that, it's the best representation of my level design skills at the moment. I will also show you some previous iterations of this level along with some early layouts that are only left on the paper. But without further ado, let's begin. My approach to designing levels drastically changed since the first iterations of this map. While I'll talk more about these at the end of the video, now I want to focus on how exactly this latest version was created. At the start, I wanted to set the goals that this map had to achieve. It had to present two new game elements to the player, it had to give the player a greater challenge than the two previous maps, and it had to be situated in a big rift. The mod is called Rift 17 after all, so I've created a basic layout of the level and divided it into a couple of segments. I've had an opportunity to focus on each part individually, and this approach worked nicely for this map. At the start of the level, the player has a crowbar, a pistol, an SMG, and a shotgun at their disposal. They also can obtain a revolver in the earlier levels, but it is considered a secret weapon that not everyone will necessarily find. In previous levels, the player found himself mostly in claustrophobic closed environments, so for contrast I present them with this beautiful vista. It also helps to navigate the player. I also placed this battery here specifically to draw the player's attention to this spot. And here's where the player first encounters the new game element. Explosive pipes that not only are capable of dealing damage and explosion, but they also can grant access to previously unavailable areas. This first pipe acts like a gate that prevents the player from progressing until they understand how the mechanic works. The bright red color and the flammable sign should give an idea of how to interact with this new game element. And a small shortcut that gives the player access to the previous floor and that ammo box that we saw earlier. I just want to avoid the situation where the player cannot progress because of the lack of ammo. Now, we're approaching the first action segment. The player gets in a dangerous position. On their left is a corridor that the enemy can use to close the distance with their target. It is blocked with the fence so the player cannot push the enemy back. On the right is a long hall at the end of which there are two turrets and more enemy soldiers. The lack of cover and effective long-range weapons at the player's disposal lowers their chances of survival. By putting the player in such a situation, I encourage them to use a new game mechanic that I recently introduced. The first thing that the player needs to notice now is a couple of grenades conveniently highlighted with a white paint splatter. Also, the lack of lighting in this room contrasts with the area behind those windows. Here I rely on the player's understanding of their enemy's position. With it, the player can do something like this. Now the player has a positional advantage over the soldiers. We also reached a distance where weapons are effective again. The usage of explosive pipe in the room with grenades and windows is an intended way to handle this encounter. However, that does not mean that the player has no other options. The glass floor allows the player to see the enemy's approach in advance and gives time to plan further actions. Soldiers can be taken out in an old-fashioned way, or you can get rid of them with a new trick. And now we come to the second major action segment on this level. Here I offer the player more ways to handle this encounter while giving them a more serious challenge. The player now is on high ground from which they can see a couple of explosive barrels in the distance near the enemy position. However, the barrels are covered with unbreakable glass from this side. And again, we're in a position where weapons do not reach their max effectiveness. So there are two options. The player can go down the stairs on the left and go to the bridge in front of him, or they can jump to the roof of this very bridge. In both cases, they will receive a pulse rifle, which will allow shooting enemies at long distances. For this video, I'll choose stairs. With this weapon, the player can get rid of a couple of soldiers in a distance, but here I deliberately limit the ammo for the pulse rifle. This way I can encourage them to get closer to the enemy in search of additional resources, or to make effective usage of close-range weapons possible again. This will create additional tension as the player risks more. And another one of these explosive pipes, but this time it is located right under those explosive barrels that we saw earlier. With the barrels destroyed, we not only disposed of some soldiers on the roof, but also deprived them of some additional cover. If the player had previously chosen an alternate path, they would have passed through this crack in the wall. Still, we can get up there and pick up the resources that we missed. Now we see another part of the vista that we observed at the very beginning of the level. We can see how far we've progressed through this rift. Here I slow down the pace a little. The last encounter with the soldiers was the climax of this map, after which I let the player take a little breath. And it's a perfect time to present them with a new game mechanic. The yellow glow on object should naturally attract the player's attention. They may try to interact with it by pressing the E key, but nothing will happen. We can see more supplies behind the glass. The only way to get to them is to disable the field that is blocking the path. Now we can try to interact with this one. And now I've just presented a new game element by using the player's curiosity. That battery can be used to power up these fields and to open up certain doors. A little bit of environmental storytelling. First of all, it shows how broken and unstable everything is in here, and it's also more interesting than just simply opening the door for the 100th time. I've created this encounter not to challenge the player, but to not let them relax completely. It's still possible to die from these NPCs if not careful. In Hugo Martin's terms, this combat puzzle consists of a poisoned zombie that throws poison headcrabs at you, which can lower your health to 1, and a fast headcrab that doesn't deal much damage but can finish you off. And I've placed this encounter in a narrow corridor with not much room for dodging. It's also a test of players' ability to prioritize targets. And of course, I don't forget to reward the player for exploring. There were more of the hidden supplies earlier, but I've skipped them to save time. Now we'll get to the final part of the level. This section is more focused on exploration rather than on combat. This hull is a focal point of this segment of the map. From the get-go, the player sees their next objective. That is another one of these yellow sockets near the big door. It also highlights the importance of this area. Now we need to find the battery. Another one of these sockets. This one is optional. It only opens the door to the stash with supplies. Here the player can see the location of the battery. Now their goal is to find a way to get there. In Half-Life 2 and episodes, it's common to mark hidden supplies with the lambda sign. I decided not to break that rule, so the player can still rely on those kinds of signals. Here the player must go through the dark narrow corridor with more headcrabs. To increase the feeling of discomfort, I deliberately created these open doors on the sides. Because of that, the player can expect headcrabs attacking from any direction. In Half-Life 2 and episodes, Valve is using these wooden board models usually to block the player's path and to encourage them to use either crowbar or the gravity gun. The main thing about these models is that they are breakable. Considering that this is a mod for an existing game, the player should recognize this element. So I've made the floor out of these boards. This secret isn't obvious by design. A secret for the experienced Half-Life players that I probably wouldn't put in a completely new game. Another encounter with the soldiers. There are fewer of them this time, but they still pose a threat. Also, they're using turrets again. I've placed this first aid kit on this table to attract the player's attention and encourage them to use this room to get closer to the turret. However, in the next room there is another turret. I've created this crack in the wall to force the player to crouch to avoid the damage. And to increase the tension, I've placed 2 poisonous headcrabs here. If they bite the player and reduce their health to 1, any shot from the turret will be fatal. This particular explosive pipe can be used just to kill flanking soldiers. We finally got to the battery. This section of the map that the player just traversed is one big rectangle. That layout allowed me to show the player's goal to them at the beginning. It also allowed me to provide them with a convenient shortcut. Let's leave the battery in the main hall for now. Let's see what else is on the second floor. This is another optional area where you can find supplies. Just giving resources to the player would be boring, so why not add a hidden zombie? Moreover, this particular NPC is rarely used in the original games, which gave me another reason to use it. In Half-Life 2 Episode 2, it does appear only once in the entire game. So we're back where we started. Now we can use the battery to open the stash we saw at the beginning and to open the main door. And that concludes this level and the entire extended demo. This map has gone through a lot of iterations, and there were a lot of reasons why I remade this map at least 2 times from scratch. One of the earlier versions of the level has gone to trash just because I failed to stick to the technical limitations of the Source engine. And yeah, that was my mistake. The frame rate was dying, so the map had to face a similar fate. The other reason for recreating this map was that my skill level rose and so did my understanding of my own work. The standards became higher, and unresolvable technical issues that I've had with one of the iterations of the map gave me a perfect reason for creating a much better version of it. But even now, I see a lot of things that I could have done better. But I want it to be a time capsule of what I achieved with this work. I think it's better to focus on something new, to make it even better. If you have any offers or questions regarding this video or the project itself, feel free to contact me via email or private message on montdb.com. That's all for now. Thank you for watching.